So our presenters here are Sean Loney, and Sean is the Director of Development at Aki Energy, a social enterprise that works with First Nations to identify cost-effective energy options. Prior to that, he was the Executive Director of Build Incorporated, an award-winning Aboriginal social enterprise creating employment in the trades in Winnipeg's inner city. He was recognized in 2014 as Ernst & Young's Prairie Entrepreneur of the Year, and he also received the Ashoka Fellowship that same year for his work in developing Manitoba's social enterprises. This is Sean Loney. I'm just going to introduce our next panelist as well. Our second panelist is Erica Barbosa Vargas. She is the Director of Social Finance over at the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation. And prior to the foundation, Erica had 13 years of global professional experience under her belt in private and community sectors in Canada and abroad. She is currently collaborating with researchers in looking at partnership research on impact investing. And our last panelist in the J.W. McConnell Foundation Awards. No, we're just kidding. Our last panelist for this session is Brenda Zerba, and she is the Vice President of Sales, Marketing and Development for Tribal Witch-Wewin Capital Corporation. She brings 17 years of experience in marketing, sales management, and executive leadership, as well as the post-secondary education in psychology, commerce, and marketing. Well, that's a great degree there. Okay, so we are going to be looking at social finance. It is growing and it can be tricky to navigate. So on today's panel, our guests will discuss their experiences in social finance and on the ground tactics that would make sense for your organization. And we will start with Sean.
Thank you very much. Is it on now? I have a feeling I did something wrong.
Do you want to just give him the...
Here. I'm a little nervous. I watched a lot of North of 60s, so. Yes, thank you very much. If we could get the slides up. I work at a social enterprise center in Winnipeg's North End, and it's 30,000 square feet of Aboriginal nonprofit businesses. And we do all kinds of things from insulating. We've actually lowered utility bills at over 12,000 low-income households in Winnipeg. We have also, we do bed bug remediation. We lower utility bills on First Nations. We do water retrofits as well. So it's a very exciting place to be. And one of the things that drives what we do is a very important piece around social finance, and which I think can absolutely revolutionize Indigenous economies and also government. And one of the things as problem solvers, what we find is that we're completely disconnected from government. And we need ways to connect problem solvers to problems. And this is a bit what we're going to talk about today. So next slide. Are you able to advance slides? So we find this in our daily work that government, we're a problem for government. Because we go to government and they'll say, well, we don't have money to finance you. We are out of money because we're spending money on diabetes treatment. We're spending money on incarceration. We're spending money on all things that look like poverty. And so what we need is governments to be able to connect, have mechanisms to connect problem solvers to problems. And the next slide, what it means for us is financing tools is probably the most important mechanism, although there's a bunch. Now, Aki Energy does geothermal on First Nations, and we do a lot of it. We only started 3 years ago, but we've already done 350 homes, plus a lot of commercial installations. And We're going to talk a bit about it in the next presentation at 3:15, but we actually start social enterprises on First Nations, and they do the work. Geothermal is a technology that cuts utility bills in half, and it's expensive up front. The old way is you'd have to ask government for $17,500 to put it in to lower your utility bills by half, and they don't have that kind of money. We've done 350 units so far at 6.1 million. It's actually probably closer to $8 million when you include the commercial work that we've done. So if we were to go to government and say, hey, do you have $6.1 million? They don't have $0.1 million to spend on us because they're too busy spending it on problems. So next slide. What we've done is develop a financing mechanism called Pay As You Save. And it's extraordinarily simple and extraordinarily powerful. It's being used in Europe, and Manitoba was the first jurisdiction, I believe, in North America to implement it in at least this profoundly a way. What you see represented on the bottom is the utility bill. It doesn't matter what it is, just the utility bill. And what happens when we're finished with the geothermal retrofit, this can also be same with an installation job, is that the bill gets cut in half. So you can see the red on the top is makes up a half of what the bill was before. On top of that comes a financing charge, and this is where the magic happens, is that there's a financing charge put on the utility bills that continues to be collected until the total $17,500 upfront is returned to who's ever providing the financing. And the green represents the space that is the net utility bill reductions. So the bills go down, they all go down, they must go down. And the $6.1 million is advanced. Next slide. In Manitoba, you mind popping ahead to the next slide? In Manitoba, it's Manitoba Hydro that's providing the financing, and that's particularly helpful because they're also the ones issuing the utility bills, and they're very good bill collectors, so they know that they're going to get their money back, and there isn't any risk in there for them in that. But what we see, this pay-as-you-save mechanism, is a way to connect the problem solvers to the problems, and it's very, very important that way. And what's really cool is that I think this is what's going to revolutionize government. When governments understand that their role should be to make it easy for problem solvers, we're going to be clear sailing. Because you can use this system for diabetes. So I'm here with my coworkers, my boss, Darcy Wood, and Rodney Contois, and Kate Taylor. You guys not getting along? You're not sitting together? We've also used the same model to develop a farm at the Garden Hill First Nation. The provincial government put $300,000 in. That's the same cost as treating one dialysis patient for 3 years. We think of it as a pay-as-you-save model. And just in a very brief way, that's the tool we're using, and it can be used with incarceration as well. Provincial government is talking seriously about building a new jail for $220 million to lock up more Aboriginal people, basically. And Build can do the same thing for $8.5 million, keep as many people out of the incarceration system.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Great, thank you. Okay, so now I get to speak. I was in the previous session, but now I get to speak a little bit about our work at the McConnell Family Foundation. Is this too high? No? That's perfect. That's good? Okay, great. Social finance is something very interesting for us because, and if you pair that with social innovation, and how it's growing and how it's evolving, what essentially it means, aside from the solutions, aside from the domains and how we might be able to apply it, it's really allowing us to change completely and think very differently about not just governance and power dynamics, but even in terms of like transactional dynamics between those that hold capital and those that are the recipients of capital. And it's allowing and making us rethink about how governments are transacting with community in terms of service delivery. It's certainly affecting foundations. It's increasing the capacity for citizens to be able to provide capital to their peers and to be able to scale solutions. And there's a range of opportunities. I'm going to speak specifically about what it means in the context of foundations, how we're transitioning to that, and where some of the opportunities that we see are happening. Foundations typically have been known for their charity work and for their grant making, and usually supporting charitable organizations, nonprofits, and some other community groups. But our grant making only represents between 3 to 5% of all the assets that we hold. And for a very, very long time, there's been questions, or we haven't been paying much attention to what is being done with the rest 96% of our total assets that tend to be in the capital markets, in the bond markets, and we, a lot of times, don't even look at what's happening there. Over the last decade, we've started to see a shift in that. So our foundation has been supporting a lot the development of social innovation and certainly the social finance marketplace. And it's been over the past 8 years that we started to explore social finance and impact investing, and really setting out the question of, like, are there ways in which we can take some of that money that is in the capital markets and bring it in alignment with our mission. And so we had an initial a mandate by our board to put 5% of our total assets into impact investing, which we've reached this year. And it really is, what's starting to become very interesting is that when we think about impact investing and social finance, there's a typical question, well, can they go hand in hand, social, environmental, economic development with financial returns? Do we have to sacrifice? How is it different than grant making? And our experience so far has been that it's a wide range. So continue to do our grant making that right now we're enhancing, and we're leveraging some of the work that we're doing by providing some investment capital. In some cases, we are taking concessionary positions. So we say, we're not going to take as much financial return, but this is really helping us advance a greater impact, so we can make 0% interest loans, for example. If that can be helpful for the organizations. But we're also investing in social ventures. So these are for-profit enterprises that are also advancing some social or environmental objective, whether it's organic food, green skincare products, and those types. And we're also working in the public markets in a different way. So investing still in public corporations, but a lot of engagement with the corporations to be able to influence how they change some of their environmental, social, and governance practices. A lot of times in alignment with our own interests around sustainable food systems or indigenous community development corporations that are working in the communities around free, prior, informed consent. So we're starting to see that there's really like a huge opportunity in terms of being able to use investment capitals in smarter ways. We're starting to see the same change in corporations. We're starting to see the same change in governments also too, which are not there just to provide grant support, but also hold investment capital, and they're trying to see, well, are there ways in which we can align much more with community development interests. In terms of the recipient side, but it's not a straightforward process, and a lot of foundations are looking to change the way in which they manage their investments, but we're not right there yet. So if you go and knock on foundations' doors, they're not going to be ready to give investments or to give loans in the same way that you could access a bank or other financial institutions. But I think that so a lot of there tend to be a lot of questions in terms of what is it that you're looking for, and what do we mean by social impact? How do we define all of that, and what are investors looking for in that sense? And the answer to that tends to be really, it depends on the organization. It's very important to think about social finance not as not real investment. There has to be really like a financial viability and a solid business model. And then in terms of impact, it's really, really very broad. It's really about like what is the direct results of your intervention in the community, in the economy. And I think I'll maybe stop there to let you speak before.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erica. I'm from TWCC, or Tribal Wet'suwet'en Capital Corporation. We've heard a lot about social financing over the last day, and TWCC has had deep roots in social financing since 1993. Since our initial capitalization of $3 million from the federal government, we have lent out over $50 million to Aboriginal First Nation entrepreneurs, businesses, and farmers. It's important to note that we are one of 54 Aboriginal financial institutions spread across Canada that has diversified. That has diversified. TWCC is self-sufficient, and we have achieved that through strategically diversifying into other lines of business with an eye to social enterprise. And I'm here today to talk specifically about one of our lines of business, which we call ASCII Financial. How many of you in the audience have seen the money marts and the cash stores pop up all over the place consistently? Those are what we call predatory lending. And before the regulations came in across the provinces, some of those predatory lenders and other credit traps charged about 1,000% interest. Tribal Wet'suwet'en saw this as a real issue within our northern communities specifically. That's where ASCII Financial started. And we strive to provide Indigenous people, not just in Manitoba now, but across Canada, with inexpensive short-term loans. And we are able to do this not just through ASCII Financial, but through a network of our sister AFIs that partner with us. And we are able to partner with employer groups and provide a borrowing program by which employees who do not typically have access to what we call mainstream lines of credit to come in and borrow a short-term loan that they can pay back between 5 and 8 pay periods. This is done through payroll deduction, and rather than going to the predatory traps and paying 500 or 1,000% interest, they can come to their employer. It's discreet, and they can decide themselves how much they need, how long they want to pay it back. Because typically, if someone needs to borrow $500 right now, they can't afford to pay $500 back in 2 weeks. So that way, our program and our partners program allows them to choose to pay it back. That is a little easier for them and to help them get caught up, because things happen, right? Cars break down, you need to get into the city, you need to buy school supplies. And unfortunately, there are some people in our society that just don't have access to short-term credit. And how do we give back to our people, to our communities? Collectively, Tribal Wet'suwet'en is owned by 5 tribal councils and independent First Nations. And because we are a for-profit business, we give back to the communities through scholarships, through powwows, through elder gatherings, and through diversifying into other business lines that help build capacity, that we send our people to school to educate, and then we hire them. And that creates an economy, it gives people jobs, and that is our goal, that is our mandate, is to not be to be self-sufficient, but also how do we give back? How do we make life better? How do we educate people? Because that is the key, is the education. It's about financial literacy, but you can't talk to someone about financial literacy when they're hungry. Right, Dominic? You have to ease them into it, but you have to make sure, you have to give them a tool to help them get over that hump, and then bring them in and educate them. And that is what Tribal Wet'suwet'en is all about. And I have a lot more information on the program but I've been told we have a certain amount of time. So if you have any questions, I will be around today and tomorrow, and I would be happy to answer any questions about ASCII Financial. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. Hello. Okay. Are we on? Yes. Oh, sorry, you guys. Woke you all up. Okay, just before you go for your coffee, wake up. Okay, we have now just only about 15 minutes so to do some Q&As. And so if you have a question, you can just put your hand in the air and I'll come over with the mic and you could ask a question. And if not, I will, oh, there we go. Okay, great.
Thanks, Tina. Thank you so much for all of your presentations. I found each of them very interesting. Back to the first one, that pay as you save, is that was amazing. And just want to share, like from First Nations, and I work in Atlantic Canada with the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet. One of our communities has recently qualified to borrow from the bond markets, and that's Member 2 First Nation. And Chief Terry Paul is the chief of Member 2, and he talks about publicly that when Member 2 was able to move their debts from the banks to the bond markets through the First Nations Finance Authority, that they saved a considerable amount of money per month, and in excess of $100,000 per month savings, interest costs. So you've really got me thinking on how can we take what you've stated there and what you've done there and roll that in so that more of our First Nation governments can actually get to that point where they can actually have the same sort of savings. But it's an interesting, powerful thought, so thank you for sharing that. More of a comment than a question.
Yeah, it is a very powerful tool. One of the things we're big fans of saying at ACCI Energy and at Social Enterprise Center is that there's an upside of down. Poverty generally means there's enormous amounts of money being spent, but they're leaking right out of the communities. And so we look at that and say, fantastic, because you can create employment by interrupting the economic leakage. And the tool to do that is pay as you save. You look at diabetes treatment as an excellent example. The amount of money that is being spent on diabetes in the north right now is just astronomical, but there's no money for healthy food. So we need to get governments to understand is like, hey, my role as government is to make it easy for problem solvers. The way I'm going to do that is say, you are going to save us a lot of money. So therefore we'll put some money up front and we'll claw back the department later on that as they're enjoying the savings. And it just frees up creativity. Think about child welfare. I was quite struck by the last presentation here. The answers are not at government. You can have all the government departmental coordinating groups that you want. The answers are in the community. Indigenous communities know how to look after their children. They just need the tools to do it. So if government were to say, look, in Manitoba we have 10,000 kids in care. So if they were simply to say, if you've got an idea that's better, it's achieving better results than what we're achieving now, we will finance it. We'll force ourselves to finance it. The problem will go away really quickly. But right now, problem solvers are a problem for government, and that's got to change.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Thanks. My question's to Erica. You mentioned something about you're sort of ahead of the curve and government, a corporation and government are starting to think about social impact investing. Can you comment on how close a corporation, or are there any examples of corporations that you know of that aren't just doing philanthropic or cause marketing spending, and are they actually, do you see them sort of going to this 2, 3, 5% social impact investing?
Yes, and I'm happy to also share a resource afterwards that there's a really good publication called Breakthrough Corporate Venture Capital. And what it does is it looks, corporations are starting to do this from their investment arms, And some of them, the ones that are a bit more ahead, that have realized it's not just about corporate social responsibility, but actually there's an opportunity to innovate and transform systems. So Nike has done, as an example, Nike has done this where they've said, we're not just going to try to embed certain sustainability standards and social justice standards across our supply chains. What if we actually completely transform the textile industry? And so what they're doing is they're putting a lot of resources and investing in companies and in R&D that are about dyeing without usage of water, and all sorts of processes that are reducing water consumption, environmental impacts. And what happens ultimately is that if those products and those companies grow into the market, it has all sorts of effects for the corporation. And then Nike is investing in those corporations. So they have actually realized that by investing in environmental, social impact in ways that are related to their business model, they will win as well and stay ahead of the curve themselves. Intel is doing a lot around data and education, for instance, and then it really depends on the corporations and what the bottom line is and the strategy of the corporation. Cemex in Mexico, for example, is putting a lot of resources into investment in infrastructure, and then they're providers of also the products and the supplies for the infrastructure development. So there's a range of groups that are doing that, and it's all coming from their strategy arms and their investment arms, not their corporate social responsibility.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Just to put a finer point on some of the questions that were asked, what's the status of social impact bonds? In Alberta, the Alison Redford government had them on the map. When she got defeated, they were completely obliterated. Is there something in the federal level that's being used?
So I know, I probably can't speak, they're not publicly announced at the moment, but there's a couple that are being designed at the moment. There isn't one yet that has been implemented at the federal level. It has been quite difficult to set them up, and I think this is a global challenge just because, at least in the initial structure and model at which they were conceived. So just for clarity, the idea behind social impact bonds is that governments are currently spending a lot in patching solutions, and they don't have enough resources to put into preventative interventions around health, around employment, a range of issues. And the idea is that private capital can be brought in to invest in prevention, which would in principle lead to savings in the long term to government, where they're spending right now in solutions for those problems, so they could repay investors back a portion, using a portion of those savings. So it's been very difficult to actually figure out how do you materialize that formula, and a lot of times the problems that we're trying to solve around employment, around health, end up having costs not to just one agency or to one ministry. So who bears the cost of that? I know that there's one around health that might be coming, where there's been a single agency that is taking the responsibility and stepping forward, but it's not. We haven't seen them yet.
Can I just ask further to that question? Do you know of any models? Are there any existing models that
are being implemented?
Yes.
Yes, there's a few around the world. So the most known was the first one on recidivism out of the UK. That is also already going into its fourth year of results. So that's a good case study to look at, because it's gone through ups and downs, and so it does highlight sort of like what are some of the challenges around social impact bonds, some of the concerns, and there's a few that are being tested in the US for early childhood development, recidivism, as well as health. There isn't any, I don't think yet.
do we have yes, another question here?
Thanks, Tina. And really, my further question was stimulated by your question, and back to this savings, pay as you save. I've had the pleasure of working within the First Nation Mi'kmaq community for many years, and I've been asked, so Todd, what do you think about the applicability of social impact bonds in a First Nation context? And it is about savings to somebody, and other capital comes in to enable that, and they get paid back, and the whole thing works. But you've effectively done the same thing with the pay-as-you-save, but you've done it. Are you able to, because that hasn't been done too much yet, and maybe, but you've done this. And sir, I don't know if you can help me understand, how have you done that? What differentiates what you've done that you've been able to be successful on, and yet that hasn't got traction yet? I'm just curious, my mind's wondering now.
What it came down to was a bare knuckle brawl with Government of Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro. Just completely stuck in an old paradigm. And communities need tools to be successful, and if they're given those tools, they will be successful. And there's a big difference between fighting poverty. I'm a big fan of saying poverty has no causes. It's very important that we stop fighting poverty. Prosperity has causes, and poverty is the absence of prosperity. So if governments can understand that, they will quickly give communities the tools to be prosperous, and things will take care of themselves. We're hoping to do $100 million worth of pay-as-you-save, and the great thing is about it, Manitoba Hydro doesn't care. We could do $1 billion and they wouldn't care, because they know they're going to get their money back. And I think the same thing could be used, you know, just to think of diabetes, that we started a farm, a healthy food market, and taking over the canteen at an arena at the Garden Hill First Nation, so there'll be no more junk food sold there. We're changing the food economy. We're not providing healthy food. Do you see the difference between the two? You invest in changing the food economy, things are going to happen that are really, really exciting. The cost of that, the same as treating one dialysis patient for 3 years. There's 500 diabetes patients in Garden Hill alone. Government cannot afford to go on the way that it is. And they need to start not even investing, just allowing communities to be successful. That's really what it is. And you think about it, colonization, that's over? I don't think so. I mean, the rules are all set up, we're still colonizing. And we don't even realize it. 20 years from now, we're gonna look back and say, oh yeah, remember when we couldn't afford to not haul diesel to off-grid communities? When there's biomass and geothermal alternatives available? So we're doing some goofy stuff now and it's exciting that there's alternatives and that they're emerging, and it's going to be good.
We're talking about ground tactics that would make sense for your organization. So can we just talk a little bit more about, and just on what you were talking about there, Sean, about the ground tactics? It's not just working with governments, it's about working with communities too, I imagine. So what are the partnerships, or what is necessary to facilitate moving forward?
That's a great question, Tina. The most important thing communities need is they need a problem solver. You cannot solve a problem without a problem solver. And what Aki Energy does is we get social enterprises going in the First Nations that they control. We support the social enterprise, a nonprofit business. Then it begins to solve the problem. It's an economic tool. Governments do not solve problems. Economies solve problems. And government's role is to make that economy emerge. And so we have social enterprises now we're working in 6 different First Nations in Manitoba. We just started 3 years ago. This is not difficult. The biggest enemy we have is the federal government, the provincial government, and Manitoba Hydro. Manitoba Hydro's Act was written in 1960. They're still acting as though it's 1960. And it needs to be changed. It needs to be making sure that communities can be successful in reducing their utility bills and causing employment at the same time. And we're just kind of around the edges right now. So, you know, that would be another barrier to prevent communities from being successful. Want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think It's really interesting, and there's multiple ways. I think that as long as we shift sort of like this mental paradigm in terms of who's responsible for providing services, for providing solutions, and that we start to see that there's an opportunity to shift some of those dynamics, there's some hope. So we're starting to see, for example, with crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and crowd investing, a type of democratization of investments and individuals being able to support peers in developing solutions. So it's no longer go to the bank to get your money. I was just recently reading in Asia, I think that there has been crowd equity investments close to the billions at this point. And there's, and to your point, Todd, I think that right now, we're currently operating in a system where there's a high degree of inefficiencies. And so wherever we can identify some of those inefficiencies and find ways of like changing that, and whether it's through savings or just shift in how the capital flows are taking place, there's something to be gained. There's just one little example that I have from Latin America, where, for example, there was a lot of problems with people migrating from rural areas into urban settings, and initially taking or being placed as illegal settlements. So in order to formalize their ownership of the land, they typically have to go through a range of processes, bureaucracies, etc., and would cost them something in the range of, let's say, $1,000. And these are groups and people and communities with very, very little resources that can most of the time not even cover those costs. There was one cooperative that was formed that said, okay, you know what, we're going to be able to do all of this at larger scale for all of you, and by them centralizing and being the coordinating entity, would go and do 100 of those at once and really reduce the cost to, let's say, and they would give them sort of like a credit to a loan to be able to do through that process, but they would reduce the cost to about 300 instead of 1,000. And what then they did was not even give the money to the community members and then get repaid, and the interest was very high at 30% interest. What they did was they partnered with an electrification company, which now that they had formed the ownership of the land was formalized and there was electrification provision, started to add $1, let's say, to the electricity bill to be able to repay to the cooperative their loan. But the money never came in or out of the members. The cost of formalizing land ownership was significantly reduced, and it was sort of like a win-win-win for everybody. So.
Did you have any comment, Tom?
Just to further expand on my two panelists here, I think it's really important that we view the situation and the problems not as problems, but as opportunities. Because where there's a need, there is an opportunity. And as more and more organizations realize by working with and working for social financing and social development, that there are opportunities to grow their organizations. And also, on the flip side, communities have to realize that the answer is not coming from government. It can't come from government. It has to come from, as we said, from collaboration and strategic partnerships. And I think we're on a good highway here for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And please give a round of applause to our panelists. That was an excellent session.